There's no makeup.
Simple.
Time, baby. I'm ready because I have a rant on that.
Thank God I'm recording this.
W. Stewart, along with our University of New Haven Athletic Director, Dr. Z, Shea and Zenger. Dr. Z, how you doing today?
Doing well. Well, as always, glad to be here.
Great to be along with you. This is episode 2 of season 3. And as always, we appreciate you joining us across all of our social media channels. And as always, our podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. A lot to get to today. No guest today, just going to be you and me, but we have a lot to get to. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about is anyone who's watched this or listened to this podcast over the last 3 years since we created it knows you're a big Kansas City Chiefs fan. So here we are a few days after the Chiefs lost to the Bengals at home in a big upset. First of all, your thoughts on the game?
First of all, we've talked a lot about just doing the two of us.
Yep.
And talking about everything from restaurants in West Haven, New Haven to any number of topics. But this one just lends itself to a topic we're going to discuss later. But let's start with the Chiefs. And, I still have a hard time ever categorizing myself as a fan, being a former player and coach and whatnot. And fan brings with it so many other connotations. But in light of the Chiefs, I'm nothing more than a fan. And we were talking about this earlier, J-Dub. It's a heartbreaker that they lost the AFC Championship game in the way they did. But as I sent a text to several friends, you live by the sword, you die by the sword, meaning we won in NFL overtime the week before and lost it this week. And I said to my Bills fan friends that, win or lose, I don't like the NFL's version of overtime. I didn't like it 2 weeks ago, and I didn't like it this week. Mm-hmm. More than anything, I didn't like the way some media followed up on that game with respect to Patrick Mahomes and saying he choked and he this and that. I said to my two sons, hey, guys, let's look at it this way. I'm going to look at it as our, huge contract quarterback took us to, 4 AFC Championship games at home in a row. Let's celebrate that, because at the end of the day, we live in a winner-take-all society. We don't remember who even took second place in Super Bowls or national championships or this and that. It's only the champion, and that's it. And I reject that, and I resist that. The Chiefs ended up in the Final 4 of the NFL. Mm-hmm. The Bills ended up in the Final 8. A lot of teams didn't. And so that's my football rant for the day, J-Dub.
You want people to back off Mahomes.
There you go. I think that's essentially what I'm saying. I appreciate watching that guy play every game, whether he plays for the Chiefs or anybody else. He's the most talented athletes I've ever seen. And I like his personality, the way he handles success and failure. And I'll support that guy, over and over with that.
He's a class act, no doubt about it. I think he, regardless if you're a Chiefs fan or not, I think he's an easy guy to root for, Dr. Z, based on how he carries himself on and off the field.
And, a word that you don't, I think, hear me or other professionals in higher education or athletics say very often is he's fun.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need more fun, and he does it in a way that's not in your face, and it's not the me brand. He brings a certain level of fun physically and mentally to the game.
As a coach and a former player, is it fair to pin any loss on any one person?
Never. And I'm going to say that, because if you do that, then you're discounting every other play of that game. And any coach would say to any young player, you never know what play in the course of a game to take off. Mm-hmm. Well, in the course of a game, it's the theory of linear events. This play way back here affected this play way down here. And so often they do that to kickers.
Yep.
And, all the kicker did was end up being the guy at whom, had all the pressure on him at that point. He's not the one who fumbled the ball or intercepted the ball or threw, and so we could go.
On the flip side of that, again, as a coach, former coach and a former player, is it fair to give any one person all the credit for a win?
No, I can't answer it, one way and not answer it the other. It's a team win, it's a team loss. And let's face it, I think it's interesting that we're calling Tom Brady as he retires today or yesterday, or the day before, whenever it was, the GOAT. And GOAT now stands for something, the greatest of all time, something pretty cool. I remember when GOAT meant you were the guy who, is it Bucky Scribner? I mean,
Bill Buckner.
Bill Buckner, that's it. And a few others, I think back to an AFC championship or NFC championship game a few years ago when there was a fumbled punt return and things like that. And people love to just, execute whoever did that, when all that individual did was end up in a spot where all the pressure was on him or her. And, one more piece of that, and I used to visit with a columnist at the Kansas City Star about this, and we talked about writing a book about it with chapters on individuals like this. So people who end up in that spot position think at one time they were probably the greatest athlete in their high school, maybe even their whole conference.
Mhm.
And then they went to college and they thrived, probably all conference at the very least, maybe an All-American. They end up getting drafted. They end up in whatever spot to be where they are. So to be that version of a GOAT, you had to have great success to even be in that pole position.
Yeah. And Tom Brady wasn't somebody who was a great quarterback in high school. He rode the bench for the most part at Michigan. We all know the story. 6th-round draft pick, 199 overall in 2000. Really had a great career early on, but had a lot of success from age 37 on as well. Yeah. So talk about someone who certainly worked at it. Yeah, I agree with you on both counts. I want to go back to something you said before we switch gears, what we really want to be talking about today. But of course, you coached in the college ranks. You mentioned the overtime rules in the NFL. If you were on the competition committee in the NFL, which is very powerful, and they influence what's going to happen in terms of rules and so on and so forth, do you want the overtime rules from college in the NFL? And if so, are we taking it from the 20-yard line, the 25, the 40-yard line, the 50? What do you think?
So since it's our podcast, I get to give an opinion.
You're the commissioner of the competition committee, everything.
No one else in the world cares what I think about this, but I like what college does. And I know it can get a little crazy. We've had some situations where there's 5 overtimes or 6 or 9 or whatever the record is. But I do like how they've gone to, you have to do the 2-point conversion. They've altered it to make it crisper, so to speak. I would take your cordial amendment, and I would back it up in the NFL, probably to the 40.
Yep.
And make them earn it a little bit more. And I'll give the NFL a little bit of credit. I felt for the Bills, and as I felt for the Chiefs several years ago when the Patriots beat them, when they never got to touch the ball. I think any overtime that lets that happen is, I don't know what that is. That's a coin toss flip, right? However, I guess you could argue that if your defense can stop their offense, you're probably going to get good field position, as the Bengals just did. And then you got a good shot at a field goal. And so I see that, but it's still not equitable.
Did you think when Mahomes and the Chiefs won the flip in overtime, they were winning the game?
Oh yeah. I heard the cheers. I was up pacing around the room.
You mentioned retirement of Tom Brady. He's gone. Ben Roethlisberger has retired. Drew Brees is gone. Eli Manning a couple of years ago. Peyton Manning a few years before that. It's only a matter of time before Aaron Rodgers retires as well. What do you feel? Because you're a fan of the game, regardless if it's pro or college. How do you feel the NFL? Do you feel they're in good hands with the old guard kind of leaving and the young guns kind of taking over?
So my son Luke just sent me a picture of all those individuals and saying it was a farewell to them. And I think I shot a text back to him and to both Luke and Jake saying, but the young guys coming on, it's going to be fun to watch. And we could list all of them from Mahomes to who we've seen with the Bengals and the Bills and the Chargers and it's easier to name the teams than
you got Josh Allen with the Bills, obviously. You got Justin Herbert with the Chargers. You got Lamar Jackson with the Ravens, Joe Burrow with the Bengals. You got an early Super Bowl pick for us, Bengals versus Rams. You have a preference or rooting interest?
I'm a Bengals fan. I like Burrow. I like their coach. I like their rags to riches story. And I can't help talk about all these quarterbacks and I'm sure some of our viewers and listeners who are old school miss this. And as an old running back coach, I yearn for the day when we used to talk about running backs, and we don't talk about them anymore. I mean, that was football. We had 2-back sets, we had full houses. Student body right, student body left. That's a thing of the past. I watch some sets now. There's nobody in the backfield. You don't know who's on the line of scrimmage and who's not. And then the defense lines up that way. It's 7-on-7.
As an old option quarterback for yourself, it's a little weird, isn't it? You would not survive in the NFL, would you?
No, I would have quickly been moved to strong safety. I have no pretenses about what I really was. I was a misplaced strong safety because they didn't have anybody else.
I think the NFL is in good hands with these new quarterbacks. Although it's to your point, Z, about the running backs, the best running backs on many teams are actually the quarterback themselves.
Oh yeah, you don't get through high school and college without being one of the best athletes in your in your school or conference even. And so we're seeing those guys now being unleashed, as runners. And even Burrow, I think they were saying he hadn't run that much against the Chiefs. He did. He opened it up.
Yep. Well, the game changes, of course. We know that it certainly evolves. One thing that doesn't change is hopefully our values.
That's right.
And that's a perfect segue to what we really want to be talking about today. Last episode 1 of season 3 of the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast, we were honored to have Bill Snyder, the legendary Kansas State football coach, a father figure and a mentor to you, wrote this book called My Football Life and the Rest of the Story. We only had 25 minutes with Coach Snyder. That is not nearly enough time. We are barely scraping the tip of the iceberg there. So we wanted to spend a little bit more time today on this show, delving into what Coach Snyder said. Just for everyone who may have missed last week or doesn't know the story, please set the timeline again for all of us when you started at Kansas State and how you got to know Coach Snyder. When did you start and when did you leave?
Okay. So I joined Coach Snyder as part of his original staff back in 1989. He was hired in December of 88 and started to assemble his staff. And as fate would have it, and this goes back to my theory of linear events, decisions I'd made a decision to go be a graduate assistant football coach at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, largely because it was a place where I could actually coach the receivers, do some recruiting. It had the degree program I wanted in journalism law at that time, that I wanted as a master's program. A little known offensive coordinator from Iowa was hired at Kansas State. At that time, Kansas State had the losingest program in the history of college football. They'd lost 500 games faster than any program in football, followed only by Northwestern, right behind them with like 490. Both purple Wildcats. We always talked about that. I don't know what the significance of that was, but it exists. So Coach Snyder was hired, and then he hired the head coach from Drake, Nick Cortero, who had been a kicker at Iowa and then a grad assistant at Iowa, but had gone on to be the special teams coordinator for Dennis Green at, of all places, Northwestern, before being the head coach at Drake. Well, Coach Snyder hires Nick, and they turn around and hire me. And they hired me in the position that we'd now call on-campus recruiter on the recruiting side, and or assistant director of football operations. And that lasted for just a few months. I was promoted at the age of 23 to director of football operations. That's what we call it today. Back then you called it administrative assistant, but there were only like 2 or 3 of us at that time. So they didn't know what to call it. And so I began a career as the youngest full-time staff member in the country at that time. The tongue-in-cheek joke is, yes, but I'm at the losingest football program at that time and was paid commensurately. That staff, J-Dub, included names like Bob Stoops, Jim Levitt, eventually Mike Stoops, Dana Dimmel. These are all head coaches and former head coaches within the Power 5 and Group of 5 schools. I'm leaving out some legendary, an O-line coach named John Latina. Again, I talked about Nick Cortero, who'd been the head coach at Drake and later Fordham, back in this part of the world, and assistant head coach at Iowa State and North Texas. And I'm leaving out Mark Mangino, who joined us as a graduate assistant, who eventually became assistant head coach at Oklahoma on their national championship team and head coach at Kansas and won the Orange Bowl there and did some great things. So and I'm again leaving out a number of individuals, great coaches, great young players that we call it the foundation years. So I left in 92, 93 to go to graduate school at Kansas. And there's a whole nother story behind that, and returned in 2000 through 2005 to begin my administrative fundraising career, in large part to be with Coach Snyder again. And so really spent a good 9 to 10 years of my career with Coach. And he's been a big part of wherever I've been since then, including Illinois State and now here at UNH.
So he taught you a lot, definitely. He taught you a lot about football, taught you a lot about life. We talked about the 16 core values, and we didn't really get into all of them. I mean, he kind of brushed over a couple of them. Again, 25 minutes, you don't have time to go through all of them. But tell us your connection with some of those core values. What stories can you relate to us about that, especially when you guys got there in 1989? So
in the family, we call them the goals for success. And he actually has a book prior to this book that was written. It's a leadership book based on those 16 goals. And it's not as thick as this one, but a book that's worth reading if you're a coach or a player or a professional of any kind. So the story kind of goes, I'm a young guy, serving. We shared a secretary, and our offices were, kind of catty corner to one another. That might be a Midwestern term. I'm not sure if it's used around here. Catty corner and cattywampus. I'm not sure if people know what that means, but we'll stick with catty corner right now. It was such that he could say my name, and I think you could tell from the podcast last week. He even pronounces my name like my grandpa did, my mom's dad, who refused to call me Shane because it's an eccentric name my mother gave me. It's an Irish last name, and both my grandpa and Coach Snyder call me Shane. And he would sit at his desk and just say, Shane, and I'd come running. He didn't even have to, the secretary didn't, no one had to get me. And this would happen multiple times throughout the day. So during that time, we started the program with 12 goals for success. And that happens. It was his first head coaching stint. And I would go have a very nice poster board made and put it down in the locker room. And the next year it was 14 goals for success. And I took it down, went and made another one and put it back up. And there's 14 goals for success. The next year he went to 16 goals for success. And so I thought, I'm going to put a stop to this. I think 16 is enough. So this is how simple it really was. I measured my door in my office, looked like a good size. And then I went to the facility guys and said, can you get me a nice piece of oak that looks like this? Yeah. Then I went down to the local jeweler who helped us with championship rings and different things we did. Said, can you make me brass plates with a goal on each of these? And he did. And then we glued them on there. And then I got the facility guys and we took a big old drill and drilled it into the walls of the locker room. And until they tore down the Veneer football complex and built the new one, that was in there.
Wow.
So that was my lasting legacy, that my door with the brass plates stayed in the locker room for the next 20 years.
If you had not come up with that idea to put the door in, how many core values would we have now?
We might still be going. I'm taking more credit than I deserve. I think he was done. Yeah. For instance, you have to read the book, but it was all about being assignment correct in what you did and goal oriented. Obviously, my favorite one was unity.
Mm-hmm.
Come together as no group has ever come together before. And I clung to that when we would go through tough times. We didn't win right away, and we'd have a lot of naysayers on campus in the community say, what are you doing? We've never won here before. And I was the guy out there always asking for the next objective. Mm-hmm. And once we started to win, the yeses came a lot easier than they did in the beginning to whatever it was we were trying to get done.
Whatever happened to the door? You said they built a new place. What did they do with the door? Did you ever find out?
No idea. I was at the rival institution when that happened.
Gotcha.
So no one called me and said, would you like the door?
I kind of wish someone did now.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, some of your favorite ones. Unity is one that stands out to you. Yeah. What is one or two others that stand out to you?
Without getting too specific, I don't know if Coach I'd rather have him describe them, but it had to do with being precise and prepared. If you talk to Coach, we were in a strategic planning meeting one time in my second stint with him, and we're coming up with all these core values, and he added to that. I don't know if this is in the dictionary, but he wanted the word preparedness. Mm-hmm. And if you know him, that's what drives him. That's why he shows up at the office before 8:00 and goes home during the season after midnight, almost every night. Back in the early days, Sunday, we'd go home between 1 and 2 a.m. Monday, it was 1 a.m. or, Monday, Tuesday was somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m. Wednesday, you slacked off a little to maybe midnight. Thursday was family night. You got home around 8 or 9. And Friday was the night before the game. And so you're with the players till everyone goes to bed at 11 or 12. And then game day on Saturday, back when you tended to play at 1:00, like we do here.
Yep.
Because he was ready. And he didn't go home after the game on Saturday. And I'd say this too. I was in his office after every game, Coach, what do you need? What do we need to do here? You couldn't tell if we won or lost. Mm-hmm. He would just go to work and do what he did. And the next morning, when all the staff showed up again, it was time to get ready for the next opponent. Mm-hmm.
Very even keel.
Oh, but it's important you said that, J-Dub. And I think you saw that from the podcast last week. Never too high, never too low. Always had time for anyone who knocked on the door, in part because he was there 120 hours a week. So he would always take the time to address whatever someone needed because he was going to be there at 8, 10 o'clock and midnight. And, at the end of the night, he wrote thank you notes. And if he's famous for anything in that part of the world, I can't tell you how many thousands of people have a thank you note from Bill Snyder. And Doug Looney once wrote an article for Sports Illustrated. It's in the book here. He came to us in year 1 or 2 and wanted to do a deep dive on the program and Coach Snyder. And it was on the front page of Sports Illustrated the next week or month. And futility U. Mm-hmm. It was really a slap in the face. Well, the next year we won 7 games, and he came back and he apologized, said, I want to do a different dive on this. And when he did, he was meeting with a group of leaders on campus. And what he found was he's going, what's different here? And some young person spoke up, a member of the band, and said, I got a thank you note from Coach Snyder at the end of the year for being a part of the band and being supported. And another person raised their hand and said, I did too, as Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences for helping with such and such program. And almost everyone in the room had gotten a thank you note. This is a true story, and it became legendary. I actually have a stash of thank you notes from Coach that I've gotten over the years. Birthdays, he sends them to opponents, young men who perform at a high level against his team or struggle. I mean, and these show up in the media sometimes. It's just who he is.
Does he still do that to this day?
Oh, absolutely. I got one several months ago for something. I'm not sure what I did or said, but I got one and I kept it, and it's sitting on my desk.
So you guys had to turn around this program. We didn't really get into this with Coach Snyder, but hopefully the next time we'll talk more about it. What was the key? Would he say hard work? Is that it, or was there something else? How did you guys do it?
J-Dub, I don't know if I told you this story for you to use that term. I've answered this question my whole professional life. When people find out I was with him during that time, the answer is hard work. There is absolutely no substitutes for hard work. We had 2 programs, and it doesn't matter now because it's been so long ago. Both Minnesota and Notre Dame were struggling at that time, and they sent down administrators and or coaches to interview Coach and meet with someone, say, how have you done it? And they both went home disappointed because there was no magic fix. It was simply being prepared, outworking everybody else. And it wasn't just being at the office till midnight or 2 a.m. You could sit around and play tiddlywinks. But with him, you were on task that whole time. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to spend that many hours, you're outworking the opponent. It's kind of like you want to go to bowl games because you want to have that prep time before the bowl game for your young players. Mm-hmm. They're getting ahead of the guys who don't have prep time for bowl games that are at other programs. Well, he translated that into, if we're outworking our opponents, and this goes for any profession, another 20 hours a week, multiply that by 52 weeks, multiply that by 10 years, and think of the time that went into that program that didn't go into others. I think there's a famous book out there recently, Malcolm Gladwell's book, I don't know if it was Tipping Point or David and Goliath or it's Outliers, where he talks about 10,000 hours to be an expert. And another book called Talent is Overrated has the same story. Well, Coach Snyder and his staff hit 10,000 hours faster than anybody else. And that alone is that, and he left no stone unturned. I don't care what the topic was. When you went in with your answer, your solution, it was never enough. He always sent you back to get more information, gather more data. And his famous quote to me was always, Shane, take all the time they give you, and there's always more time. And several years ago, I asked him really what he meant by that. And he said, there's always, you'll make a decision, and the next day new information comes in that would have changed how you made your decision. So if they'll give you more time, always take it. I've probably driven my staff members crazy with this. Rob's listening, John's listening. Often I'll say, let me sleep on it. Mm-hmm. Give me more time. I don't care if it's the color of the carpet or some letter we're going to write, because the next tweak, the next piece of information could be the thing that changes the color of the carpet you want, or what you want to say in your letter.
I wanted to ask you, you've learned a lot from Coach Snyder, obviously, the 16 core values and all the other stuff he's taught you. What or how much of that do you use in what you do here for us at the University of New Haven, and how does that influence our mission here?
It's like being asked, you were raised by your parents, how does that influence what you do? And for me, that was, I said it last week, he caught me at just the right time in my career, kind of being handed off from my parents to him, and everything just meshed so well. Separated out. And there's certain things within our program, any program I've been a part of, that's my own personal philosophy that I share with coaches and staff and student athletes that I don't talk about publicly for the purpose of this podcast. And this is the UNH family. I'll say it real quickly. So I ask our student athletes and our coaches and our staff to be assignment correct, fundamentally sound, and mentally tough, to play in the classroom and their personal lives. And that, for me, was my summary of those 16 principles. And you may say, how'd you come upon that? I said, well, as I was a young coach at Wyoming, trying to teach my running backs what it was I wanted them to know from those 16 principles, I thought, when it's 4th and goal, they don't have time to think about goal 14 was this. Now, in your life, you can have it up on your wall, you can have it in a book, you can have it memorized. But when it's fourth and goal, you need something to go to right now. And for me, it was those three items I just shared with you, because you can remember one of those three. And they all apply directly to the field of play, the classroom, or your personal life.
Coach Snyder, has coached in a couple of different eras, and certainly goes back a long ways. These days, as a college football coach, there is no off season.
No.
And even at the Division II level, there's really no off season. When you guys were there at Kansas State, was there ever an off season, even in the early days?
No. And what I would say is he's one of the individuals who invented the fact that there was no off season. That's how we got ahead of people. The summers, tongue in cheek, and I hope Coach didn't watch this. You worked on, think about it. You play football from, late August, the schedule late August through November, hopefully December, maybe January. We worked on Memorial Day.
Wow.
We worked on Christmas Eve.
Wow.
I wouldn't have said this till he retired. We all looked at each other. Yeah, we got a 3-day weekend. We got Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and Sunday evening.
There's two things of those 16 core values. There's two things that jump out to me. One is unselfishness. The other one is leadership.
Yeah.
To your point, Coach Snyder was not going to ask you guys to do something he wasn't doing himself.
Oh, stop. I have the best story ever. To that point, I had walked into the building one morning. It was a Saturday, probably in the off season, and we were all there. So it must have been recruiting or something. There was snow, just like we have out here, all over the place. And we got there. I had gotten there before anyone else had, and I just, went to my office, was doing some work, and for some reason forgot something in my car and was heading back out the front doors to go to my car. And what did I find? Bill Snyder in a suit with a shovel, shoveling the front porch and all the stairs, which I promptly took away from him and finished myself, thinking, why didn't I do that? Well, I probably thought, well, the custodians will be here soon to do it. No, he was shoveling. And, this is the head coach of what we now call a Power 5 program.
Yeah.
But that illustrates more than anything else. And I've shared that with young staff members since then. He, and I hope I will never ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself. And quite frankly, if you don't do it, I will end up doing it. That's the best story to illustrate who he is, and nothing's beneath him.
Coach Snyder's been retired for a few years now, but his legacy certainly will go on for years. You mentioned his coaching tree. How big is that coaching tree? Who would you compare that to?
It's crazy. And this where I'm a little bit of a athletic historian at times. Frank Broyles at Arkansas.
Yep.
Okay, and you may think, well, what about Bo Schembechler? What about Woody Hayes? And what about Bear Bryant? And certainly they all have huge trees. But if you do your research, Frank Broyles from Arkansas had a staff in the 60s, 70s that included names like Barry Switzer, Jimmy Johnson, Hayden Fry. I want to say Jerry Jones might have even been on that staff.
Yep.
So people forget that Jerry Jones is a real former football player and coach. He didn't just land in that chair, and there's a reason why he wants to run his program. But my point is, you take that tree, and if you go through the whole staff, I'm leaving out some really significant folks. There's 8 or 9 future head coaches in that group, and all very successful. And then you take that tree and go from there. Hayden Fry alone, Bill Snyder, Barry Alvarez, and Kirk Ferentz, a couple really important ones. But those 3 alone, think of their trees that came from the Wisconsin and Iowa and Kansas State programs. Mark Mangino is one of them. Bob Stoops is one of those. Well, think of his tree, right? That comes down from there. And that all goes back to Frank Broyles. I could talk about this forever. I think that's fascinating. And from that, to anyone who's, coaches, players that are listening to this, alumni, all of those folks use the same recruiting philosophies for the most part, and even more importantly, practice plans. So here's something, I think Pince and I talked about this on one of these podcasts. You either come from a tree that breaks practices down into 10-minute segments, or you break them down like every 10 minutes is something. Okay. I come from the tree where you've got the fundamental period. That's 15 minutes. You've got the middle drill. Some people call it 9-on-7. That's a 10 or 15-minute period. Your periods have names, and they automatically carry a certain minute segment with them versus the 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Both systems work, and there's other systems. Bill Snyder just happens to come from the Hayden Fry tree that comes from the Frank Broyles tree that does it that way. So I would guess Barry Switzer, Jimmy Johnson, and others probably mirror what I was taught growing up.
You talk about legacy and the branches or the roots of the tree and how far they extend. It's pretty incredible. The book is My Football Life and the Rest of the Story. Z, it's 372 pages. You're a voracious reader. How long did it take you to get through this?
I scanned it first while Luke and I were watching some football game. I sat there and I was taught. My dad taught speed reading, so I scanned it first, and now I'm going back doing the deep dive. Okay. And I teased Coach about it when the first time I called and asked if he'd come on the podcast. I said, Coach, it's called The Rest of the Story, like Paul Harvey said, and then there's the rest of the story. and that's the case for any industry, any profession. But the stories I'm sharing with you, most don't show up in that book, and there's many more. I can go on and on about the student athletes that played for us. That I think I shared before the podcast. One young guy, Coach calls me a young guy, so I call Eric Wolford a young guy. Has been a head coach at a place like Youngstown State. Was most currently the offensive line coach at South Carolina, and now Kentucky. He just went to Alabama. I'm proud of him. I got a call the other day from Eric Gallen, our first running back at Kansas State, that is the first individual I know of that didn't wear a cast after tearing his ACL due to coach uncovering stones, helping him find a new way to go from being injured in spring ball to starting his first game, in the fall. Who's the offensive coordinator at Robert Morris? Just called we haven't talked in years, and here he is in this neck of the woods with us. George Matsakis, the director of football ops at North Texas, who has been that position at Houston and Wyoming and Kansas, and was my first student assistant with Coach. And Dana Dimmel, the head coach at UTEP, and Mike Stoops, who was the head coach at Arizona, and of course Bobby at Oklahoma, and Manny Matsakis, who's the head coach at a number of places, and Nick Quintero, and Jim Levitt, who's been on this podcast. It's the names go on and on, both coaches and student athletes. Elijah Alexander, who was one of our first great defensive ends and athletes at Kansas State, played 11 years for the Broncos and passed away of cancer in the last few years. And I have to say this, that foundation of players, for some reason, has suffered its share of loss in the last 5 to 10 years, more than any group I know. That 4-year window, I think we've lost 10 to 12 players.
Really?
Who would be in their late 40s, early 50s right now. And don't know why. We just lost a couple more this last few years. I don't want to name names because I don't want to leave anyone out through COVID and a couple other things that have happened. But, Coach mentions a good number of them in this book, and he dedicates it to them, I believe, and references them. But we've lost a couple since then, even.
When that happens, and it happens to any family, of course, how does that support network that you guys have, the tree or whatever you want to call it, how does that help in those times of need?
The texts and the calls circle around and brings you back together again. And you never forget, of all the groups I've been a part of in my life, and it's probably just, again, the age I was and the influence he was on all of us and what we created there, the greatest turnaround in college football history. You just don't leave that. That is a family. And he named the stadium that, the Bill Snyder Family Stadium. That's a family that you'll never let go of and never forget, no matter where we are. If someone in that group calls you, you will stop whatever you're doing to help them.
Final thoughts, Z, as we wrap up this podcast.
Well, this stage, I feel like it's been 5 minutes. You, the viewers, are probably going, did 2 hours pass there? How many stories that guy tell? I don't know if I let you ask enough questions. This is something that just comes out of my soul. This is someone really wants to get to know me. Not that that's the purpose of this podcast or even this interview, but you have to go back to these 4 years and then another 5 years. Besides who my parents are and who my brother was and my sister is and my aunts and uncles and my grandparents, this is what formed me.
We've not had a chance to do this much, a podcast without a guest, but I thought this worked out pretty well today. This was fun, Z.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about food.
Amazing, right? Maybe that's next podcast
right.
Next week. But yeah, please do go check out the book, My Football Life and the Rest of the Story by Bill Snyder. A great person, and we hope to have him on the podcast again. So it's great to hear the stories, Z. Thanks for sharing them. I know that's just a very small portion of all the stories that you have to share. But I hope I certainly learned a lot, and I hope our viewers and listeners did as well today. For our producer, Broccoli Rob Thompson, for executive producer John Mays, for Dr. Z, I'm JW Stewart. Thanks for watching the Dr. Z and JW podcast. We'll see you next time.
Send me the check to the lawyer.
In the mail. Any of that make sense, Rob?